Hi, so I'm just going to answer some questions. All of these questions are related to the earthquake and tsunami prophecies that are prophesied to come to the Caribbean. All of these questions have been put together by me and are geography related. For most of the questions, you can find an answer for them online. However, for some of the questions, it requires an answer based off an opinion. The answers that are in orange text are based off of my own opinions. I am not going to be doing any type of deep research for these questions. I'll try to keep the answers as short as possible while still explaining everything. It is not my intention to mislead by giving any type of wrong information. If I have made any mistake for any of the questions, specifically for the opinion-based questions, feel free to correct me in the comments. You may need to pause the video to read the screenshots and watch the images. There's a link either in the description box or my bio for you to be able to join my Discord server. On my Discord server in the right text channel, you could find a document with all the questions and answers for this video. Okay, so let's begin. What is a fault? A fault is a fracture or an area of fractures in the earth. In other words, a fault is where the earth is split apart, whether above or under the ground. Moving on to the next question. What is a plate boundary? These are the tectonic plates of the world. At the borders where the plates meet, it is known as the plate boundaries. Moving on to the next question. Are all faults plate boundaries? All plate boundaries can be seen as fault zones. However, not all faults are plate boundaries. There can be multiple faults that are within a single tectonic plate. Moving on to the next question. What are the types of faults that are within tectonic plates? The first type of faults that we'll be looking at are normal faults. This is also known as a dip-slip fault. One side of the land is above the fault, the other side drops down and is known as the hanging wall. The land piece that is above is known as the footwall. The next type of faults that we'll be looking at are reverse faults. This is also known as a dip-slip fault. It is the opposite of the normal fault. The hanging wall moves upward and over the footwall. There is another kind of a reverse fault. It is called a truss fault. Truss faults have a dip that is less than 45 degrees. The next type of faults that we'll be looking at are strike-slip faults. This fault type is where the two sides of the earth slide past each other horizontally. There can be two types of strike-slip faults, right lateral and left lateral. Right lateral strike-slip faults are when the ground on the opposite side of the fault moves to the right. Left lateral strike-slip faults are when the ground on the opposite side of the fault moves to the left. To be able to tell if a strike-slip fault is right or left lateral, the observer must stand on either side of the fault. If the land on the other side of the fault has moved right, it is right lateral. If the land on the opposite side of the fault has moved left, it is left lateral. Moving on to the next question. What are the types of plate boundaries? The first plate boundary that we'll be looking at are convergent plate boundaries. This is where two tectonic plates push against each other. One plate pushes below another plate. The area where the plate goes below the other plate is known as a subduction zone. The plate that goes below the other plate is known as the subducting plate. The next plate boundary that we'll be looking at are divergent plate boundaries. This is where two plates move away from each other. The next type of plate boundaries that we'll be looking at are transform plate boundaries. This is where two plates move past each other. Moving on to the next question. Are all faults mapped? No, all faults are not mapped. There are unmapped or unknown faults that are not shown on maps that include fault lines. Moving on to the next question. What is an earthquake? An earthquake is when part of the earth shakes. Earthquakes can happen for different reasons and they can happen at different locations. One of the ways an earthquake can happen is by the moving of tectonic plates. Stress is built up at the plate boundaries from the plates being against each other. This stress is sometimes released. Sometimes it may be suddenly or slowly released. This release results in the plates moving past each other in a certain way which makes the land shake. This is known as an interplate earthquake. Another way earthquakes can happen is within a tectonic plate. At fault lines, earthquakes can happen. These types of earthquakes are also caused by the release of built-up stress. This type of earthquake is called intraplate earthquake. Moving on to the next question. Does the distance of an earthquake from you matter in order for you to feel it? Yes, the distance of an earthquake from you matters in order for you to feel it. The closer the earthquake is to you, the more you'd feel it. It is the same as if you were to spray perfume into the air. The closer you are to where it was initially sprayed, the stronger the smell. The further you are, the less you would smell it. However, the smell can still be faintly noticeable over the distances. Moving on to the next question. Does the depth of an earthquake matter in order for you to feel it? Yes, the depth of an earthquake matters in order for you to feel it. Shallower earthquakes tend to be much more destructive on the Earth's surface compared to deeper earthquakes. Moving on to the next question. What is a sinkhole? A sinkhole is basically a naturally formed hole in the earth. Moving on to the next question. What is a landslide? A landslide is when part of the natural ground like the soil breaks apart and crumbles down a natural slope. Moving on to the next question. What is a spring? A spring is an area of water. Underground water from inside of the earth continuously makes its way to the surface of the earth where it could form rivers or pools. Moving on to the next question. Can earthquakes cause sinkholes? Yes, earthquakes can cause sinkholes. Earthquakes can cause sinkholes directly through ground shaking and soil liquefaction or indirectly by destabilizing existing underground voids such as caves. However, if it is a small earthquake, it is not common for sinkholes to happen. The bigger the earthquake, the more likely the possibility for sinkholes to happen. Moving on to the next question. Can earthquakes cause landslides? Yes, earthquakes can cause landslides. Large earthquakes can cause the soil to act like a liquid which causes the solid soil to crumble. Moving on to the next question. Can earthquakes cause springs to form? Yes, earthquakes can cause springs to form. Big earthquakes can crack the surface of the earth, penetrating deep into the ground, which can allow the underground water to emerge. Moving on to the next question. What is a mountain? A mountain is a large elevated piece of land with a peak, highest point. Generally, all of its sides are steep. Moving on to the next question. What is a seamount? A seamount is basically an underwater mountain that that does not extend out of the seawater. Seamounts were formed by ancient volcanoes. Seamounts are said to have a height of at least 1,000 meters from the seafloor. Moving on to the next question. What is a ridge? A ridge is a long elevated piece of land with steep slopes on both sides. It can be a chain of mountains or hills with a narrow top called a ridgeline or crest. Moving on to the next question. What is an orogen? An orogen is a large area of the Earth's crust that has been thickened by a mountain building process. Moving on to the next question. What is an orogenic belt? An orogenic belt is a long line of mountain ranges created through orogenesis. Moving on to the next question. How are orogens formed? Orogens are formed mainly at convergent plate boundaries where plates push towards each other. The formation process of an orogen is called orogenesis, which involves a number of events that distort the Earth's crust leading to the formation of mountains. Events like subduction, continental collision, and accretion are involved. Moving on to the next question. Can orogens or orogenic belts be located underwater? Yes, orogens or orogenic belts can be formed underwater, primarily at convergent plate boundaries. Moving on to the next question. Does near the Caribbean have an underwater orogen or orogenic belt? When I was using the earthquake app, I saw an orogen where the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates meet in the Atlantic Ocean. Every time I tried to search online for if there was an orogen in that area, I was not able to find it. I was only finding data about the mid-Atlantic range. However, I did a little digging and the only things that I could find in that area were the Tiburon Rise and the Barracuda Ridge. Both of them are two separate underwater ridges. I don't know if they are orogenic belts or not, but if so, glory be to Jesus. I was searching for a good amount of time with no real information. I was going to give up, but I had asked Jesus for his help. Moving on to the next question. What is a mid-ocean ridge? A mid-ocean ridge is a mountainous area somewhere on the seafloor formed by plate tectonics. Moving on to the next question. How are terrestrial land volcanoes formed? Terrestrial volcanoes can be formed at convergent plate boundaries where tectonic plates push towards each other. They can also be formed at divergent plate boundaries where plates pull away from each other. Moving on to the next question. How are submarine underwater volcanoes formed? Submarine volcanoes are mainly formed at divergent plate boundaries where tectonic plates pull apart. When the plates pull apart, the magma from below emerges. The lava hardens into rock and builds up upon itself. This process takes millions of years, forming underwater volcanoes or seamounts. However, even though they mainly form at divergent plate boundaries, they can form at convergent plate boundaries as well. Whatever type of plate boundary the underwater volcano is formed at, the formation process of an underwater volcano will always involve the magma coming out from inside of the earth and hardening into a type of rock. Moving on to the next question. Are earthquakes a part of the formation process of any type of volcano? Yes, earthquakes are part of the formation of volcanoes. Volcanoes are commonly formed when magma from the earth rises after the tectonic plates or the faults move. As you should know, when the tectonic plates or the faults moves, it creates earthquakes. Moving on to the next question. Generally, do underwater volcanoes have lava in it? Yes, most underwater volcanoes have lava in it. Moving on to the next question. What is the general temperature of lava? Give a range in degrees Celsius. Generally, the temperature of lava could range from 700 to 1250 degrees Celsius. Moving on to the next question. Are seamounts volcanoes? Some underwater volcanoes can be classified as seamounts, but not all seamounts are volcanoes. Moving on to the next question. Can a volcano be formed at an underwater orogenic area? Yes, volcanoes can be formed at an underwater orogenic area. Moving on to the next question. What is a volcanic tremor? A volcanic tremor is a continuous ground shaking. Tremors in general are like small earthquakes. Volcanic tremors are caused by the magma or gases beneath the volcano. Moving on to the next question. Can volcanic tremors happen before an eruption? Yes, volcanic tremors can happen before a volcanic eruption. However, it is not needed for a volcano to erupt. Moving on to the next question. Generally, why do volcanoes erupt? Generally, volcanoes erupt when the magma inside rises to the Earth's surface. The lava is driven by the pressure and lower density compared to the surrounding rock. As the magma ascends, dissolved gases come out of solution, forming bubbles that expand and increase the pressure. When the pressure becomes too great for the overlying rock to contain, the magma surges upward and erupts through a vent, carrying lava, ash, and gases with it. Moving on to the next question. Can earthquakes cause any type of volcano to erupt, terrestrial or submarine? Yes, earthquakes can cause volcanoes to erupt. Large earthquakes can trigger volcanic eruptions, but only if the volcano is already close to erupting. The earthquake can disturb inside a volcano, pushing it past its breaking point, causing it to erupt. Moving on to the next question. What is the smallest earthquake magnitude that can trigger a volcanic eruption? It depends on if the volcano is primed to erupt or not. It also depends on how close the earthquake is to the volcano. Let's say the volcano is primed and the earthquake was close to the volcano. I assume that a magnitude 4.5 earthquake can cause a volcano to erupt. Moving on to the next question. What is the furthest distance that a big magnitude earthquake needs to be to cause a volcano to erupt? Let's assume that it's a magnitude 9 earthquake. It depends if the volcano is already primed to erupt. Let's assume that it is ready to erupt. I assume that if a magnitude 9 earthquake had happened, the furthest distance that it could be to cause a volcanic eruption is within a 200-kilometer radius. I say this because around this area, both in and around Venezuela, it regularly has earthquakes, although the majority are small earthquakes. Moving on to the next question. What is the furthest distance that a small magnitude earthquake needs to be to cause a volcano to erupt? Assume that it's the earthquake magnitude from your answer before the previous question. It depends if the volcano is ready to erupt. Let's assume that the volcano is primed. I assume that if a magnitude 4.5 earthquake happened, the furthest distance that it could be to cause a volcanic eruption is within a 15-kilometer radius. Moving on to the next question. Can underwater volcanic volcanic eruptions cause earthquakes? Yes, underwater volcanic eruptions can cause earthquakes because of the magma movement under the volcano. When volcanoes erupt, they can cause small earthquakes for a period of time. Moving on to the next question. Can an underwater volcanic eruption cause a tsunami? Yes, an underwater volcanic eruption can cause a tsunami. As the lava pushes out from the underwater volcano with extreme pressure, it displaces the surrounding water, causing tsunamis. The higher the pressure of the eruption and the bigger the volcano, the bigger the tsunami will be. Moving on to the next question. Can multiple tsunami waves generate from an underwater volcanic eruption? Yes, multiple tsunami waves can be generated from an underwater volcanic eruption. Moving on to the next question. If an underwater volcano erupts, can it cause the surrounding sea to boil? Yes, the surrounding sea can boil if an underwater volcano erupts. However, it must be close to where the eruption is. When the lava enters the water, lava entry, the lava superheats the water, which causes the water to become hot. Moving on to the next question. How many underwater volcanoes are there in the Caribbean? Name them. The Kikimjani volcano is the only known underwater volcano in the Caribbean. Moving on to the next question. What size of an earthquake do you think that could trigger the Kikimjani to erupt? Assume that an earthquake happened close to it. I assume that a magnitude 5.5 earthquake could cause the Kikimjani underwater volcano to erupt if it happened close to it. Moving on to the next question. What size of an earthquake do you think that could trigger the Kikimjani to erupt? Assume that an earthquake happened far from it. I assume that a magnitude 8 earthquake could cause the Kikimjani underwater volcano to erupt if it happened far from it. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. Do you think that it has lava in it? Yes, I believe that the Kikimjani underwater volcano has lava in it. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. What earthquake magnitude do you think that it could generate? I assume that it could cause a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. Do you think that it could boil the surrounding sea? I assume that it could boil the sea water that is close to it. I don't think that it could reach Trinidad and Tobago nor Carriacou, only Grenada and possibly Rhode Island. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. How high do you think that the seawater could reach on the initial blast? I assume that the seawater could reach above 50 feet in the air when the volcano erupts. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. Do you think that this could generate a deadly tsunami? How high of waves? Yes, I believe that this can generate a deadly tsunami with waves reaching up to 33 feet in height. However, on the initial blast closest to the beginning, the waves will have a peak. It could be over 50 feet in the air. Moving on to the next question. Suppose that the Kikimjani underwater volcano erupts. If a tsunami is generated, what's the furthest island in the Caribbean that you think it could reach? Celestial had said that it would reach Puerto Rico and the B Islands. Celestial speaks what Jesus tells her to speak. I cannot argue in disagreement with God and win. Moving on to the next question. Do you think that it is possible for there to be a powerful enough earthquake to shake all Caribbean countries? I personally don't believe that Jesus would allow for such an earthquake to happen. It would definitely be way off the Richter scale. However, I do believe that there could be a massive earthquake that can trigger other parts of the planet to cause other earthquakes. It's just like what Celestial said would happen when California gets its mega earthquake and mega tsunami. Moving on to the next question. Assume that an earthquake's epicenter came from somewhere within the land of Trinidad. What size of an earthquake do you think could cause parts of the land to split apart? I think that a magnitude 7 earthquake could cause parts of the land to split if it came within the land of Trinidad. The bigger the magnitude, the more destruction. Moving on to the next question. The picture for the following 3 questions was taken from a mobile app called Earthquake Plus. The brown line is a plate boundary. Where is this plate boundary located according to the image? This plate boundary is located around the middle of Trinidad. Moving on to the next question. Identify what type of plate boundary it is. It is a transform plate boundary. Moving on to the next question. Assuming that a big earthquake happened close to or at the boundary itself, can it cause the land to split apart at this area? Yes, I assume that if a big earthquake such as a magnitude 7 happened close to or at the plate boundary, it could cause the land to split apart in this area. Moving on to the next question. These images were taken from an app called Earthquake Plus. The red lines are faults. Identify what type of faults they are. If they have specific names, name them. The 2 faults in the image that goes through the northern part of Trinidad from west to east are known as the El Pilar fault and the Arima fault. The Arima fault is the one on top. There are debates about what kind of fault it is. Some say that it is a normal fault and some say that it is a strike slip type of fault. The El Pilar fault zone is a right lateral strike slip type of fault. The fault in the image that goes through the lower middle part of Trinidad from west to east is known as the Point Radix fault or the Darien Ridge fault. It is said to be a right lateral strike slip type of fault. The fault in the image that goes through the southern part of Trinidad from west to south is known as the Los Bajos fault and I think the South Coast fault. The Los Bajos fault is the one on top. It is a right lateral strike slip type of fault. The South Coast fault is said to be a mix of a thrust fault and a strike slip fault. Moving on to the next question. Assuming that a big earthquake originated from the land of Trinidad, could it cause the land to split apart by those fault lines? I think that it depends on how big the earthquake is. It would need to be above a magnitude 6.5 earthquake. It would also need to originate close to the faults for it to cause the land to split apart in those areas. Moving on to the next question. Assuming that a big earthquake originated from the land of Trinidad, specifically what could happen to the X section of the faults in Port of Spain? I think that it could have a big sinkhole in that specific area. However, the big earthquake would need to be close to the faults. Moving on to the next question. Are there other faults in Trinidad? Name some of them. Yes, there are other faults in Trinidad Trinidad, such as the Caroni Fault, the Central Range Fault, and the Warm Springs Fault. Moving on to the next question. Do you personally think that the Kikimjani volcano can erupt? If so, give an estimation as to how close or how far in the future it can be. I think that the Kikimjani could erupt in less than 6 months. It depends on how angry the Son of God is. Jesus the Christ is the Son of God. Okay, so that's about it for this video. You might need to watch over the video to understand the answers a little bit more, or you could go to my Discord server and download the document with all the questions and answers and read it over for yourself. Remember, I got most of the answers online, and some of the answers are based off of my own opinions, and I am not a geologist or anything like that. And anyways, people, Jesus bless.